The stars had always called to humanity. For 300 years, they had answered that call, spreading across 12 star systems, building colonies, and reaching for the unknown. But in all that time, they had never truly understood how dangerous the galaxy could be. Captain Laura Simmons stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Starward Bound, watching the sensor readings with growing concern. Her ship was small, designed for science and discovery, not combat. The crew of 47 souls had signed up for adventure, not war. "Captain, I'm reading multiple contacts emerging from hyperspace," said Lieutenant Commander Danny Ochoa, her tactical officer. He was a former Marine, built like a fighter, with scars on his hands from battles he rarely talked about, counting 112 vessels, all military configuration. Laura felt her stomach tighten. They were in uncharted space, conducting a routine survey of a system that wasn't supposed to have anyone in it. Now they were staring at an entire war fleet. "Can you identify them?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. A captain never showed fear, not when her crew was watching. Danny shook his head. "Nothing in our database. These are new contacts, alien vessels." Dr. Priya Nair, the ship's xenobiologist, rushed onto the bridge. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a brilliant mind. Her job was to study alien life, to make first contact peaceful and productive. She had trained her entire career for this moment. "First contact protocols?" she asked, slightly out of breath. Laura nodded. "Open a channel. Standard greeting. All frequencies." The message went out into the void. Humanity's introduction to a new species. Words of peace, offers of friendship, hope for mutual understanding. The response came quickly. The view screen flickered to life, showing a creature that made Laura's blood run cold. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in thick natural armor that looked like dark stone. Its eyes were small and cruel, set deep in a skull that seemed designed for violence. When it spoke, its voice was like grinding metal. "Primitive vessel, you have entered the territory of the Vethrani Dominion. You will surrender immediately. Your crew will be cataloged and assigned to appropriate labor castes. Your genetic material will be harvested for the Dominion's use. Resistance is not permitted." Laura stared at the creature for a long moment. Behind her, she could feel her crew tensing. Danny's hand moved slowly toward his sidearm. "I am Captain Laura Simmons of the United Earth vessel Starward Bound," she said, her voice steady. "We meant no intrusion into your territory. Perhaps we could discuss this through diplomatic channels. Our government would need to be consulted before any agreements could be made." The Vethrani commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your government is irrelevant. The Dominion does not negotiate with lesser species. You have 1 standard hour to comply. If you do not surrender, you will be destroyed. This is not a request." The screen went dark. Silence hung over the bridge like a funeral shroud. Laura looked at her crew, saw the fear in some eyes, the anger in others. These were scientists mostly, not soldiers. They had families back on Earth, lives waiting for them to return. "Danny," she said quietly. "Options?" He was already working his console. "We can't fight them. 112 warships against our survey vessel would be a joke. We can't run either. Our engines can't outpace their military drives. But I can send a message. Emergency beacon to the nearest human outpost. They won't be able to stop it in time. Do it." Danny's fingers flew across the controls. The message was compressed, encrypted, and fired toward human space at faster-than-light speeds. It contained everything: the sensor data, the threat, the coordinates. A cry for help thrown into the darkness. "Message sent," Danny said. "Now what?" Laura turned to Priya. "Tell me about these Vethrani. Anything from our databases, any rumors, anything at all." Priya was already searching. "Almost nothing. Some old reports from deep space probes, all marked classified. References to a conquering empire that has subjugated over 200 species across multiple sectors. She looked up, her face pale. Laura, these things have enslaved entire civilizations. They don't take prisoners, they take property. Not today, Laura said. She pressed the ship-wide communication button. All hands. This is the captain. We have made first contact with a hostile alien species. They have demanded our surrender. I want to be very clear about something. We are not surrendering. We are citizens of Earth, and we do not become anyone's slaves. She paused, letting the words sink in. Security teams, arm yourselves and prepare for boarding actions. All crew members, report to your emergency stations. We have trained for this. We have prepared for this. These aliens think we're just another weak species, waiting to be conquered. They are about to learn how wrong they are. The next 50 minutes were controlled chaos. Danny distributed weapons from the armory. Every human aboard knew how to fight. It was mandatory training, a lesson humanity had learned from its own bloody history. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and you survived by being ready for anything. Priya found more information as she dug deeper into classified files. The Vethrani had been avoiding Earth's sector of space for centuries. There were notes, fragmented reports, warnings about humanity that didn't make sense until you read them carefully. The Dominion knew about humans. They had been afraid of them. Someone had made a terrible mistake coming here. The hour ended. The Vethrani fleet moved closer. A boarding shuttle detached from the lead warship and approached the starward bound. They're burning through the airlock, Danny reported. He stood at the front of the security team. 12 men and women armed and ready. 30 seconds. Laura joined them. She had served in the military before becoming a captain. She still remembered how to hold a rifle. The airlock exploded inward. Smoke filled the corridor. Through it came the Vethrani warriors, massive and terrible, their armor gleaming, their weapons raised. There were 12 of them. The finest soldiers of a conquering empire. Veterans of 100 campaigns against 100 species. They had never known defeat. Danny smiled. It was not a friendly smile. You should have done your research, he said. The Vethrani charged forward, confident in their superiority. They expected screaming, terror, surrender. That was what always happened. Every species they had ever encountered had broken before the might of the Dominion. What they got instead was humanity. The fight lasted 11 seconds. When it was over, 12 Vethrani warriors lay dead on the deck. Not a single human had fallen. Danny wiped blood from his face and looked at his captain. "Orders?" he asked. Laura Simmons stepped over the bodies and walked toward the bridge. They had just started a war with the Galactic Empire. Earth needed to know what was coming. Get me a channel to that fleet commander. I think it's time we sent a message of our own. The message from the starward bound reached Earth in 3 hours. It traveled through relay stations, bounced across communication networks, and finally landed on the desk of Admiral Patricia Cole at Solar Defense Command. She read it twice. Then she started making calls. Within 6 hours, the Third Fleet was mobilizing. 47 warships, each one built for a single purpose: war. These were not exploration vessels or science ships. These were weapons, designed by a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of her flagship, the carrier Ironclad, and watched her fleet assemble. She was 62 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many battles. She had hoped to retire without fighting another war. That hope was gone now. "Specialist Tran," she said to her communications officer. "What's the latest from the starward bound?" He was young, barely 30, but brilliant at his job. "They've secured their vessel, Admiral. Killed the boarding party with 0 casualties. Captain Simmons sent a counter-transmission to the Vethrani fleet demanding they withdraw from the system. And their response? The Vethrani commander laughed at her, called humans a primitive species that would soon learn its place. Patricia Cole allowed herself a small smile. He's going to regret that. Far across the galaxy, on the Vethrani Dominion's command station, a very different scene was unfolding. Chronicler Yethmai was old by her species standards, having served the Dominion for over 200 years. Her job was simple: maintain records of every species the Dominion had encountered, conquered, or destroyed. She had catalogued thousands of civilizations, each one eventually brought under Vethrani control. But tonight, she was afraid. She had been ordered to research the species called humans after the incident at the survey ship. What she found in the archives made her hands shake. The files were old, some dating back centuries. Scout ships had observed Earth from a distance, watching the primitive species develop. The reports grew increasingly alarming with each passing generation. Humans were persistent predators. They had evolved on a planet so dangerous that it was classified as a Category 12 death world, even though the scale only went to 10. Their world was filled with diseases that could kill, animals that could tear them apart, and natural disasters that should have wiped them out 100 times over. Instead, they thrived. They domesticated wolves, turning predators into loyal companions. They conquered every environment on their planet, from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. They developed weapons that could destroy entire cities, and they used those weapons on each other. The reports describe a species that had fought wars continuously for their entire recorded history. Not because they were forced to, but because conflict was woven into their very nature. They were competitive, aggressive, and utterly unwilling to submit to any threat. Most disturbing of all were the biological notes. Humans could survive injuries that would kill most species instantly. They could lose limbs and continue fighting. Their bodies healed themselves at remarkable rates. They consumed poison for recreation and called it alcohol. They deliberately set food on fire before eating it. Every Vethrani scientist who had studied humans had reached the same conclusion: avoid them at all costs. Someone had ignored that warning. Yethmai brought her findings to the War Council, a gathering of the Dominion's highest military commanders. She explained what they were facing. She showed them the combat footage from the Starward Bound, slowed down so they could see what had happened. 12 elite Vethrani warriors, the finest soldiers in the Empire, had been killed in 11 seconds. The humans moved with terrifying speed and coordination. They showed no fear, no hesitation. One human female, barely 5 feet tall and weighing perhaps 100 pounds, had broken a warrior's arm and used his own weapon against him. "We should withdraw," Yethmai said. "The humans are not like other species. They cannot be conquered. They will fight until they are all dead, and they will take us with them." Supreme Warlord Kethzon rose from his throne. He was the most powerful being in the Dominion, commander of its fleets, master of its armies. He had never known defeat. "You speak of fear," he said, his voice cold. "The Dominion does not fear. We have crushed 200 species beneath our boots. We have enslaved civilizations that thought themselves mighty. These humans are nothing but clever animals. They surprised us once, they will not surprise us again." He turned to his generals. "Mobilize the invasion fleet, 12,000 warships. We will burn their colonies and drag their people back to serve the Dominion as slaves. This rebellion ends now." Yethmai bowed her head and said nothing more. She had warned them. They would not listen. Back on the Starward Bound, Captain Simmons stood on her damaged bridge and stared at the Vethrani fleet still surrounding her ship. They had not attacked again, not yet. They were waiting, perhaps confused by what had happened to their boarding party. Danny Ochoa appeared at her side. "We've got the engines partially repaired. Enough to limp to the nearest human outpost in about 6 days. And the Vethrani? Still sitting out there. I think they're trying to figure out what went wrong." He paused. "Laura, we killed 12 of their warriors. They've probably conquered entire planets without losing that many soldiers. They don't know what to do with us." Priya joined them, her tablet in hand. "I've been analyzing the bodies. These Vethrani are physically impressive, but they're slow. Their reflexes are built for strength, not speed. They expect to overwhelm enemies with power, not outmaneuver them." "That's because they've never fought anyone who could fight back," Laura said. 200 conquered species. 200 times they showed up, made demands, and watched their enemies surrender. They've forgotten what real war looks like. She opened a communication channel to the Vethrani fleet. The commander appeared on screen, his expression uncertain. For the first time, he did not look confident. "Your boarding party is dead," Laura said. "All 12 of them. Your warning shot damaged our engines, stranding us in this system. Under the United Earth Charter of Military Conduct, we are now authorized to respond with proportional force." The Vethrani commander started to speak, but Laura cut him off. "You have 1 standard hour to withdraw from this system. If you remain, you will be considered hostile combatants, and the full weight of Earth's military will fall upon you." She leaned forward. "This is your only warning. Do not test us." She ended the transmission. Danny looked at her with something like admiration. "You're bluffing. We can barely fly, let alone fight." "They don't know that," Laura said, "and by the time they figure it out, help will be here." She was right. 20 hours later, the first human warships emerged from hyperspace. Not the full Third Fleet, not yet, but a rapid response squadron of 6 destroyers. They moved into formation around the starward bound, their weapons already powered. The Vethrani fleet hesitated. Then, slowly, they began to withdraw. They had come expecting easy prey. They had found something else entirely. As the last Vethrani ship disappeared into hyperspace, Danny stood beside his captain and watched them go. "This isn't over. They'll be back. With more ships." Laura nodded. "I know, but so will we." She looked out at the stars, thinking about Earth, about the colonies, about the 40 billion humans scattered across 12 star systems. They had just provoked a galactic empire. War was coming, and humanity would be ready. News traveled fast in the galaxy. Faster than ships, faster than fleets, faster than anything except light itself. Within 3 days, every major civilization knew what had happened at the edge of human space. A species had refused the Vethrani dominion. A species had killed Vethrani warriors. A species had looked into the face of the galaxy's greatest conquerors and said no. For most of the galaxy, this was unthinkable. The Dominion had ruled for 3,000 years. They had crushed rebellions before they could begin. They had made examples of defiant species, destroying entire worlds to prove a point. No one fought the Vethrani and lived. Until now. On the neutral space station Axis Prime, the Galactic Council gathered to discuss this unexpected development. Representatives from 240 species filled the massive chamber, a sea of alien forms, ranging from insect-like creatures to floating gas beings, to species that looked like living crystals. Ambassador Tony Reyes represented humanity. He was a tall man with a calm face and patient eyes. He had spent 20 years in diplomatic service, negotiating trade agreements and settling minor disputes. Nothing in his career had prepared him for this. "Honored representatives," he began, addressing the chamber. 3 days ago, a Vethrani war fleet attacked our exploration vessel Starward Bound without provocation. They demanded our surrender and our enslavement. When we attempted to negotiate peacefully, they fired upon our ship and sent boarding parties to capture our crew. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some were surprised, others were not. Our crew defended themselves, Reyes continued. They killed the boarding parties. They then demanded that the Vethrani fleet withdraw from neutral space. Eventually, faced with the arrival of our military vessels, the Vethrani complied. The Vethrani ambassador rose to speak. He was a massive creature, even larger than the warriors who had died on the starward bound. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. The humans lie, he declared. They were in Dominion territory. They resisted lawful commands. They murdered our peacekeeping forces. The Dominion will correct this defiance. The human species will be brought to heel, as all species are eventually brought to heel. This council should not concern itself with the internal matters of the Dominion. Reyes smiled. It was not a diplomatic smile. Honorable Ambassador, he said, I would like to present some facts that the Council should consider before accepting the Dominion's version of events. Star charts appeared, showing the location of the incident. This is neutral space, according to every treaty signed by this Council. The Dominion had no legal authority there. Furthermore, I would like to share the sensor recordings from our vessel, which clearly show the Vethrani fleet firing first. The recordings played. The Council watched in silence. Finally, Reyes said, I would like to address the Dominion's claim that they will, and I quote, bring humanity to heel. I understand that the Dominion has conquered many species. I understand that you believe yourselves to be the supreme power in this galaxy. Allow me to correct this misunderstanding. He paused, looking around the chamber. Humanity evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. We survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, diseases that wiped out half our population, and predators that hunted us for food. We didn't just survive. We conquered our world. We domesticated the animals that once ate us. We built civilizations from nothing. We split the atom and touched the stars. His voice grew harder. We have fought wars for 10,000 years. We have developed every form of combat imaginable. We have studied the art of killing with a dedication that no other species can match. We do this not because we enjoy it, but because our history taught us that weakness means extinction. He turned to face the Vethrani ambassador directly. You didn't attack a minor species. You attacked humanity. And we don't forget. We don't forgive. And we absolutely do not surrender. The chamber fell silent. Even the Vethrani ambassador seemed uncertain how to respond. In another part of the galaxy, on the colony world of New Portland, General Martha Quinn was preparing for war. New Portland was one of humanity's newest colonies, home to 3 million people. It was also the closest human settlement to Vethrani space, which made it the obvious target for the coming invasion. Quinn was 60 years old, a career soldier who had fought in 3 colonial conflicts and a dozen smaller engagements. She knew war like other people knew their own children. When the intelligence reports came in showing a Vethrani invasion fleet of 12,000 warships heading toward human space, she didn't panic. She got to work. We have 6 days before they arrive, she told her command staff. The Third Fleet will reach us in 5 days, but that's only 47 ships against 12,000. We need to prepare for ground combat. Her officers exchanged glances. Ground combat against the Vethrani meant defending against soldiers who stood 8 feet tall, wore natural armor, and had conquered hundreds of worlds. I've sent out a call to every veteran in the sector, Quinn continued. Retired Marines, former infantry, anyone with combat experience. The response has been overwhelming. People are coming from everywhere. Civilian ships, personal shuttles, whatever can fly. They're bringing their own weapons. One of her officers spoke up. General, most of these people haven't served in years. Some of them are in their 70s. Quinn smiled. Colonel, a 70-year-old human with combat experience is still more dangerous than any Vethrani warrior. These aliens have never faced an enemy that fights back. They've conquered species that surrendered at the first show of force. They have no idea what they're walking into. She pulled up a tactical display showing the colony. We're going to dig in deep. Fortified positions, overlapping fields of fire, supply caches throughout the urban areas. When the Vethrani land, they'll think they're conquering another weak species. By the time they realize their mistake, it will be too late. The preparations began immediately. Civilians were evacuated to underground shelters. Military engineers built defensive positions. Veterans arrived by the thousands, gray-haired men and women who remembered how to fight and were eager to prove it. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other species were watching closely. Counselor Zethra represented the Methuan Collective, a civilization that had been conquered by the Vethrani 2 centuries ago. Her people had been slaves ever since, forced to work in mines and factories, treated as property rather than beings. She had watched Ambassador Reyes speak with something she had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. After the council session ended, she approached the human ambassador privately. "Your people are brave," she said quietly, "but bravery is not enough against the Dominion. They have 12,000 warships. They have armies that number in the billions. They have never been defeated." Reyes nodded slowly. "I understand your concern, but you should know something about humans. We don't fight wars to survive. We fight wars to win. Every conflict in our history, we found a way. We adapt, we learn, we overcome. The Vethrani have never faced an enemy like us." Zethra looked at him with ancient eyes. "And if you lose?" "Then we take them with us," Reyes said simply. "Every last one." She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled. "My people have waited 200 years for someone to stand against the Dominion," she said. "If you win, if you truly defeat them, we will rise. Every enslaved species will rise. The Dominion's empire will crumble." Reyes extended his hand, a human gesture of agreement. Zethra took it. "Then, let's make sure we win," he said. Far away, the Vethrani invasion fleet continued its journey toward human space. 12,000 warships, carrying millions of warriors, the largest military force the Dominion had ever assembled against a single enemy. They expected an easy victory. They expected surrender and slavery. They expected to crush humanity like they had crushed so many others. The Vethrani fleet arrived at New Portland on a Tuesday morning, local time. 12,000 warships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, blocking out the stars like a metal curtain. It was the largest invasion force the Dominion had ever deployed against a single target, a statement of absolute power meant to crush any hope of resistance. Warlord Kethzan stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Will, and surveyed the human colony below. It was a small world, green and blue, with cities scattered across its surface. 3 million humans lived there. Soon, they would be slaves. "Begin landing operations," he commanded. "Deploy ground forces to secure the primary population centers. I want this world pacified within 6 standard cycles." His officers moved to obey. Hundreds of landing craft began descending toward the planet's surface, each one carrying dozens of Vethrani warriors. They expected no resistance. They had done this 200 times before, and every time, the result was the same: terror, surrender, enslavement. What they found instead was humanity waiting for them. Sergeant First Class Eddie Kowalski crouched in a fortified position overlooking the main landing zone. He was 57 years old, 1 week from retirement. When the call went out for veterans to defend New Portland, he had been on a transport headed back to Earth. He turned around. Now he lay in the mud with a plasma rifle in his hands, watching the alien dropships descend. Around him were 10,000 other humans, soldiers and veterans and ordinary citizens who had picked up weapons and refused to run. "Hold fire until they're in the kill zone," came General Quinn's voice over the communication channel. "Let them think we're scared." The Vethrani landed. They formed up into assault columns and began marching toward the city. Their warriors moved with the confidence of conquerors, weapons ready, expecting nothing but cowering prey. They walked into the kill zone. "Now," Quinn ordered. 10,000 weapons opened fire at once. The first wave of Vethrani warriors was cut down before they could even react. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds tore through their ranks, punching through armor that had been designed to resist primitive weapons, not the concentrated firepower of prepared defenders. Eddie fired again and again, his rifle steady, his aim precise. 40 years of muscle memory guided his hands. Each shot found a target. Around him, other humans did the same, their faces grim, their movements practiced. The Vethrani tried to advance. They were met with overlapping fields of fire, pre-planned kill zones, and traps that had been set up over 6 days of constant preparation. For every meter they gained, they paid in bodies. High above the battlefield, Commander Yuki Tanaka led her strike group against the Vethrani fleet. The Third Fleet had arrived the day before, 47 human warships against 12,000 enemy vessels. The numbers were impossible. No reasonable commander would have engaged. Yuki Tanaka had never been reasonable. "All ships, attack pattern Delta," she ordered from the bridge of her carrier, the Relentless. "Get in close and hit their command ships. Make them bleed." Human warships were smaller than Vethrani vessels, built for speed and maneuverability rather than raw firepower. They dove into the enemy formation like wolves among cattle, slipping past the larger ships, targeting command vessels and supply transports. The Vethrani had fought hundreds of space battles over 3,000 years. They had developed tactics that worked against every enemy they had ever faced. Those tactics assumed their enemies would fight at range, trading shots until one side or the other was destroyed. Humans didn't fight at range. They got in close, where their smaller ships became advantages rather than weaknesses. They used asteroids and debris as cover. They sacrificed damaged vessels by ramming them into enemy ships. They did things that no other species had ever done. The Vethrani fleet was thrown into chaos. On the ground, the battle continued. The Vethrani sent wave after wave of warriors, trying to overwhelm the human defenders through sheer numbers. Each wave was destroyed. Eddie Kowalski had killed 37 enemies by the time the sun set on the first day. His position had been hit by orbital bombardment twice. Each time, he had survived by being somewhere else when the bombs fell. "They're learning," he reported to headquarters. "They're starting to use cover, trying to flank us. We've been fighting wars for 10,000 years. We know every trick there is." General Quinn directed the defense from an underground bunker. She moved units around like chess pieces, always one step ahead of the Vethrani commanders. When they tried to circle around the city, they found ambushes waiting. When they called in air support, human anti-air batteries shot their aircraft down. When they tried to land more troops, the Third Fleet destroyed their transports. Day became night, night became day. The battle raged on. Warlord Kethazan stood on his bridge and watched his invasion crumble. He had lost 600 warships in space combat. He had lost 200,000 warriors on the ground. His forces had advanced exactly 3 kilometers in 2 days. This was impossible. The Dominion had never faced such resistance. Conquered species surrendered after the first battle. They didn't dig in and fight harder. "Reinforcements from the home systems will arrive in 4 days," one of his advisors said. "Another 8,000 warships. We can still win this." Kethzan was about to agree when his communications officer interrupted. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Earth." The screen flickered to life. Admiral Patricia Cole appeared, her gray hair immaculate, her eyes cold. Behind her, visible through the bridge windows of her flagship, was a fleet. Not 47 ships, 400. Warlord Quetzon, Cole said, her voice flat and hard. I am Admiral Patricia Cole, commander of the United Earth Combined Fleet. I wanted to inform you that reinforcements from Earth have arrived. In addition to the Third Fleet currently engaging your forces, I have brought the 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 5th Fleets. That's 387 warships, plus the 47 already here. She paused. We're coming for you. The transmission ended. Quetzon stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he turned to his tactical display and watched as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace, surrounding his invasion force. 400 ships against his remaining 11,000. Still outnumbered. But the humans fought like nothing he had ever seen. They didn't run. They didn't surrender. They adapted and attacked and refused to stop. For the first time in his long career, Warlord Quetzon felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. On the ground, Eddie Kowalski watched the sky light up with explosions as the human fleet tore into the Vethrani formation. Around him, the other defenders cheered. They had held the line for 2 days, against impossible odds. Now help had arrived. A young soldier next to him, barely 20 years old, looked at the explosions with wonder. Sarge, how did you know we could win? Eddie smiled and reloaded his rifle. Kid, I've been a soldier for 40 years. I've fought in jungles and deserts and frozen mountains. I've fought enemies who outnumbered us 10 to 1. And you know what? We won every time. Because that's what humans do. We survive, we adapt, we win. He raised his weapon as a new wave of Vethrani warriors approached. Now get ready. This fight isn't over yet. The battle for New Portland continued, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Vethrani had come to conquer. Instead, they had awakened something they couldn't defeat. Humanity was at war. The war lasted 8 months. It was the most devastating conflict the galaxy had seen in 3,000 years. Human fleets pushed into Vethrani space, liberating world after world, freeing species that had been enslaved for centuries. Every system they entered, they found the same thing. Billions of beings who had given up hope, suddenly daring to believe that freedom was possible. The Methwin Collective was the first to rise up. When human ships appeared in their system, the enslaved workers turned on their masters. 2 centuries of rage exploded in a single day. The Vethrani garrison was overwhelmed within hours. Then the Yethrani joined the rebellion, turning their weapons on the dominion that had forced them to fight. Then the Kelmat and the Juri and a dozen other species whose names had been forgotten, but whose desire for freedom had never died. The dominion began to collapse. Warlord Quetzon retreated to the throne world, the heart of Vethrani power. He gathered what remained of his fleets around him, 10,000 warships, and prepared for a final stand. The other warlords had either surrendered or been killed. The empire his people had built over 3,000 years was crumbling, but he would not surrender. He would die fighting, as a Vethrani should. Admiral Cole brought the human fleet to the throne world. 600 warships now, reinforced by vessels from the newly liberated species. Behind her came troop transports carrying 3 million human soldiers, the largest ground force humanity had ever deployed. The battle for the throne world lasted 3 days. In space, the human fleet methodically destroyed the Vethrani defenses. They had learned every weakness, exploited every gap in enemy tactics. Commander Tanaka led her strike group against the orbital platforms, destroying them one by one, while the main fleet engaged the warships. On the ground, General Quinn commanded the assault. Human soldiers landed under heavy fire, established beachheads, and began pushing toward the capital city. The Vethrani fought back with desperate fury, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. Captain Laura Simmons, now promoted to admiral after her actions on the Starward Bound, led the final assault on the palace complex, where Warlord Ketsan had made his last stand. "Offer them surrender," she ordered her troops. "One chance." The message went out. Ketsan's response was a barrage of weapons fire that killed 20 soldiers. Laura nodded slowly. So be it. The assault began. Human Marines breached the palace walls and fought their way through corridor after corridor. The Vethrani guards were fierce, but they were fighting an enemy that had trained for exactly this kind of combat. Close quarters, room to room, the most brutal form of warfare there was. Laura led from the front, her rifle in her hands. She was 53 years old now, her hair streaked with gray, her body scarred from months of war. But she had started this. She would finish it. They found Ketsan in the throne room. He stood alone, his advisors dead or fled, his guards destroyed. He was wounded, bleeding from a dozen cuts, but he still held his weapon ready. "You have won," he said, his voice rough. "But this is not over. The Dominion will rise again. My people will remember this defeat and grow stronger. One day we will return and burn your worlds to ash." Laura looked at him for a long moment. Behind her, her soldiers waited. "No," she said finally, "you won't." He raised his weapon instead. The fight was brief. Ketsan was a warrior, one of the best the Dominion had ever produced. But he was facing a human, a member of a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting combat. Laura moved faster than he could react, disarmed him, and put him down. He died on the floor of his throne room, the last warlord of a fallen empire. 3 months later, the Galactic Council met to discuss the new order of the galaxy. Ambassador Tony Reyes presented humanity's terms for peace. The Vethrani Dominion was officially dissolved. All enslaved species were freed. The Vethrani people would be allowed to govern themselves, but their military would be reduced to a fraction of its former size. Any future attempts at conquest would be met with immediate response from a new defensive alliance. "The alliance will be called the Galactic Compact," Reyes explained. "Any member species that is attacked will be defended by all other members. Any species that attempts to enslave another will face the combined might of the Compact's military." Councillor Zethra rose to speak. "And who will lead this military?" Reyes smiled. "The Compact will have a rotating command structure, but we have agreed that humanity will serve as the primary defense force. We have the experience, the ships, and the willingness to fight." "Why?" another councillor asked. "Why would humans agree to defend species they've never met? What do you gain from this?" Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, choosing his words carefully. 300 years ago, humanity was alone. We had no allies, no friends among the stars. When the Vethrani attacked us, we had to fight by ourselves. We won, but the cost was high. Good people died because no one came to help them. He looked around the chamber. We don't want any other species to feel that alone. We don't want anyone to face conquest without someone standing beside them. We've seen what happens when tyrants go unopposed, when the strong prey on the weak. We made a promise to ourselves, a long time ago, never again. The Galactic Compact was ratified that day. 217 species signed the founding charter. Humanity, the species that had nearly been enslaved, became the defenders of galactic freedom. 1 year after the war ended, a memorial was dedicated on Earth. It stood in the center of a great plaza, a simple pillar of white stone, bearing the names of everyone who had died in the conflict. 90,000 names, soldiers and civilians, men and women who had given their lives so that others could be free. Admiral Laura Simmons stood before the memorial and addressed the crowd. Leaders from a dozen species had come to pay their respects. Behind them, millions watched the broadcast across human space and beyond. "We gather today to remember," she said, "to remember those who fell, and to remind ourselves why they fell. They died fighting for something greater than themselves. They died so that no species would ever be enslaved again. She paused, looking at the names carved in stone. Humanity wants peace. We always have. We build, we explore, we create. We reach for the stars because we believe that tomorrow can be better than today. But we also remember our history. We remember what happens when good people do nothing while evil spreads. Her voice grew harder. So let me be clear to everyone watching across this galaxy. We will always offer friendship first. We will always seek diplomatic solutions. But if you threaten our people, our friends, or our allies, you will face consequences you cannot imagine. We are the children of a death world. We are the descendants of survivors, and we will never, ever stop fighting for what we believe in. She saluted the memorial, and the crowd fell silent. Across the galaxy, in council chambers and government offices, alien diplomats updated their species databases. Under the entry for humans, they added new classifications based on the war they had just witnessed. Category 12, Death World Origin, Persistence Predators, Extreme Adaptability, Highly Social, Fierce Loyalty to Allies. And at the bottom, in the section reserved for critical warnings, they added 3 simple words that would define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. Do not engage. The stars had called to humanity for centuries. They had answered that call with exploration and hope, but they had also carried with them the lessons of their history, the knowledge that peace must sometimes be defended with strength. The Vethrani had learned that lesson the hard way. No one would forget it. And somewhere in human space, Captain Danny Ochoa sat in a bar on New Portland, raising a glass to absent friends. The colony had been rebuilt. The scars of war were healing. Life was returning to normal. But on the wall behind him hung a simple plaque, bearing words that every human child would learn from this day forward. They came to conquer. They came to enslave. They came believing we would surrender. They were wrong. He finished his drink, smiled, and ordered another. The war was over. Humanity had won, and the galaxy would never be the same.